But good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be with you here to discuss art history in Fontainebleau. And I've already discussed part of the Gustav Vigeland, the populist sculpture. We discussed it in Oslo together with Jarle Strømodden, who since 2005 is the director of the Vigeland Museum. Meaning he was also in charge, if I remember correctly, there he is. He said he's the director since 2005 of the Vigeland Museum in Oslo. He is in charge. And I had countries invited. A number of countries were invited, and I thought and what he said was very enriching, very enriching. And I decided, why not? In fact, I decided to have it as an international audience, and the relation of the audience to the public space art and public space artist, the country, the audience, and which teaches us, in a way, teaches us the differential we have between the audience expectations and the specialists of art history. So, trying to find exactly the type of approaches they each have on the side. Now, before I hand over to Jarle, I would like to tell you that if you intend to go to Oslo, well, we are celebrating the 150 years of that national great sculpture, and there is an exhibition which has been organized in a series of parallel actions, parallel studies with contemporaneous sculptures. Rodin, Mayol, the Belgium sculpture, Cotel, all these. And I could have discussed also the biography of Gustav Vigeland from Jarle Strømodden. It was also translated in English 18 after it was edited in Norwegian, which really, really showed another side of sculpture. Anyway, so much on my side, and I would like to hand over to Jarle. So, floor is yours, Jarle.
Merci. Ja, det var you have to turn it. Okay. Merci à vous. Merci pour cette invitation.
Presentation. Thank you very much for that presentation, and I would like to just to make it in English.
So thank you very much for the invitation. I will give you, I believe, a crash course in Gustav Vigeland and the sculpture park. It's not a national park as it's stated in the caption, but it's definitely a park which is very much used by the people of Norway, and also it has a very broad international acclaim. It is also a park that is possibly the biggest made by one artist in the world. And we are celebrating the 150 years of Gustav Vigeland, as also Louis presented. We have an exhibition on these days with his French contemporaries and one Belgian. And he was born in a very modest conditions in the southern part of Norway, and he was not supposed to become possibly the major sculptor of Norway. He was not supposed to be the one that really put a trademark, a fingerprint in Oslo. Anyway, this is a photograph of him in his early days, possibly the only one existing of him smiling. Yes, it's a rarity. I will just give you two examples of very early works. He was in the beginning, this is when he was 20, his debut at the Salon d'Automne in Oslo. Hagar and Ishmael, very much inspired by subject matters from the Bible. And also this one, Cursed, which is originally titled Cain and His Family. So this is Cain after being ostracized, after his killing of his brother. And also this was made in Copenhagen at this modest age of 22. He was showing, it was, I may say, a tour de force. He was presenting to those who was interesting to look at what he was doing, that he was capable of making a sculpture with an old man, a bearded man, a young woman, a boy, and a hairy dog. So this is what he was capable of. And you don't have to guess this, but I can assure you that Gustav Vigeland, he was very modest. He was not very outgoing. But I think, don't quote me on this, I think he was suffering from what you French call folie de grandeur. But he was capable of thinking big, and he was capable of achieving it. Not because of himself, but very much because he was able to connect with the right people, so they would speak on his behalf. 3 more sculptures in the public space. This is the mathematician Niels Henrik Abel. He lived from 1802 till 1829. This is very close to the Royal Palace. This was the breakthrough of Gustav Vigeland. At this stage, he was making slightly some money from being a sculptor, but he was suffering. And the French industrialist, I would say, est-il, he provided Gustav Vigeland with, in 1905, 2,000 Swedish kroner, which today equals something like 15,000 euros. So it's quite a massive sum. And that made it possible for Gustav Vigeland to finish this monument, not without controversy, but at least it was his breakthrough. And est-il, he was an instrumental part when it comes to the fountain in the park as well. In around 1917-18, the fountain was to be more or less finished. The total cost was 250,000 Norwegian kroner. And est-il alone provided with 50,000, so 1/5 of the cost. This is another view of the Abel monument. I may get back to this one if I have the time, because there are some interesting stories involving Christian Krogh, a famous Norwegian painter, and an ardent critic. Rikard Nordrock, a composer, the composer of the Norwegian national anthem in 1911, and also the first time where Gustav Vigeland is using extensively wrought iron. You can see that bottom of the stairs and also surrounding it. And this will be something that he gets back to when he is working on the park. And Camilla Collett, very important for the rights of women, the late 19th century. She, in short, we can say that she was the Mary Wollstonecraft of Norway. So this is in 1911, and this is sort of this. Now Vigeland is the foremost sculptor in Norway. Not that there were many, but at least he was. He was not he was not the best, but I would say he considered himself as the top one, if I may put it that way. The studio, which is what I call the sine qua non, without which nothing. Because after a while, Vigeland was given this possibility. He was given a studio, which was to be turned into a museum after his death. But this was in 1921 that he signed the agreement. So it's not that it's not a testament, it's an agreement between the city and the artist. And he says that everything I have made up until now, and everything I'm going to make until the day I die, will be in the possession of the city of Oslo, unconditionally. But in return, you will give me a studio, which will be a museum, and in this museum there will be my works and only my works. These days we don't pay that much attention to that, but anyway, basically what you see in the park is what you see also in the museum, and some additions. Very nice neoclassical style. They began in 1921 with a brief halt in 1924 due to financial difficulties. And they were actually using the surplus money from the cinemas in Oslo to finance building this. So actually the city of Oslo was planning and using cultural money for cultural purposes, not only for Gustav Vigeland, but also for the Oslo Philharmonic Orchestra, and also for the Kunsthalle in Oslo at that time. This is a sudden view of the studio. And this, for those of you who have been in the Vigeland Park, you may look at it as a whole, but it's very much a hybrid. It's a collection of, I would say, 4, maybe 5 things. The main gate, the bridge, the fountain, the monolith, and the wheel of life. So it is some sort of a unity, but in short, it is a hybrid. But it works. Because the fountain was something that Vigeland was working for the city of Oslo. And I do say Oslo all the time, although the city of Oslo got its name in the 1st of January 1925. So I'm not saying Christiane and Oslo, so bear with me. When I say Oslo, I mean Oslo. However, in 1905-6, there was a competition for a fountain downtown in front of the parliament. And Gustav Vigeland was very eager to get that. He was obsessed with it because when he went to Paris, first time in 1893, he traveled a lot in France also later, but he did see a lot of fountains, and he wanted to do something like that for the city of Oslo. So he started, what we see from drawings from the late 1890s is what we see today. But there's a long way, and this small detour I will do. If you look at the image here, you will see the fountain and also the monolith. So he intended that fountain and the monolith in front of his then studio. So this is around 1922. But at this time, someone in his vicinity, Thomas Bonnevie, he was part of the fountain committee, but he was also at the Supreme Court. So he's possibly the most important man when it comes to realizing the Vigeland Park. He was doing the talk, so on behalf of Gustav Vigeland. But the monolith here is coming in as an element. He originally opted for that, for a square downtown in front of the railway station. He said that, I propose a granite monolith, 17 meters high. It weighs 250,000 tons. It has not been done before, and it will require some 5-6 men for 8 years. But I think it will work. And the city of Oslo politely declined. But he kept that idea. And this is also a sketch for the Frogner area. And here's the model of what he was going to do. Because he moved into the studio in this autumn of 1923. And before Christmas, 27th of November 1924, the city of Oslo accepted that Gustav Vigeland was to put up the monolith and the fountain in the park. That's north of the small lakes, because that was a wasteland in 1924. But what you see here is a model that he made for an exhibition in 1930. And this one is also on display in the museum today. This one is just a sketch, a drawing of the whole area. And it says something about the lines. It does resemble, I would say, a French garden, French park, the symmetry. So at least Gustav Vigeland was very aware of what was going on in French parks, I would say, but also English parks and Italian. So it's not easy to pinpoint that one specific park, but it's, again, it's a hybrid it's a melange of different parks in Europe. But this area, the whole area was actually acquired by the city of Oslo in 1896. It was a growing population, but also it was, the idea was to make a public park. So that one, in the lower part of the picture, there was a park which was open to the public in 1904. But north of the lakes, it was just wasteland. There was an exhibition, a Jubilee exhibition in 1914, but that one was, well, taken down, as was the intention. But after 1914, 1915, nothing happened. So that's why Gustav Vigeland was given the possibility to put up the monolith and the fountain in 1924. And he said, okay, I will do that. He was not that positive in the beginning, but I will do that on the condition that I will also shape and design the bridge and the main gate facing Kirkeveien, which is the lower part of the image. Interestingly enough, the city of Oslo said yes. So the rest is more or less history. If we go back, this is, you can imagine this, this plan was something that Vigeland presented for the city of Oslo, the politicians, and he was given the possibility to do the plan in July 1931. So from sort of end of July in 1931, they were starting to sort of plan out the whole area. And the whole park is about 80 acres. So it's quite big. Again, just a sketch of the main axis. This is the bridge. Maybe some of you recognize it. And for those of you who don't, you are more than welcome, of course. It consists of sculptures in bronze. It shows sort of people, men, women, children, in a variety of positions. And also below the bridge, there's the children's circle, and in the middle of it, on the small column, it's this, the fetus. So I'm just showing an example of sculptures which we will see on the bridge, which you will see surrounding the monolith and also the fountain, and try to explain to you what this is. But there's no one single answer, I must admit. And that's possibly the good thing about it as well. The park is it's fairly popular. I think it's about 1.5 million people using or visiting the park annually. And that includes those of us living in Oslo and those of you coming to Oslo. So the fetus, it may express the conception. And I think, in short, the park is about conception, life. Well, conception, birth, life, and death. But it's in at least 3 possible ways. And you will see that on the bridge, in the fountain, and also the monolith. And there's one, these are original plasters from early on. This is part of the documentation of the Vigeland Museum. So I'm just showing a few examples: man and baby, woman and baby, and also man and woman in circle. And it can be seen as the struggle of life. And also, I think you should put some attention to the circle, because whenever I do a guided tour for people, say, from the Far East, I mean, some of them, and some of you, of course, are familiar with reincarnation. And a lot of people, they do spot the cyclical elements of the park. So there's no, and I speak on my behalf now, I mean, for being a Protestant, you will say that Life is about conception, birth, life, and death, and that's it. So there's some sort of a linearity to it. But for some people, there is a circular thing. So you are reincarnated. And that is a possible, and I'm saying that's a possible view of the sculptures and the park. And here's a bird's eye view of the fountain and the bridge. So he had to use the main axis because the bridge was there from the world, or the exhibition in 1914, which was to celebrate 100 years of Norway's independence from Denmark. And you have a vague idea of the fountain. So the fountain here, the 6 men holding the bowl, this is actually an element that Vigeland made a drawing in 1897. So he kept to that idea. And this is another view. And do look at the three groups, as we call them, the sculptures surrounding the fountain, and also the reliefs, because they are of importance. And this one is, yes, 2nd of August, 1897. And this is also 1906. A different shape, but here you can see the three groups, the people in the trees, they are put in a line, so you have a much better view of what is going on. The drawback now these days is that they are on a square fountain and they are put in the corner, so you don't get the linearity of the sculptures. And this one, again, just looking back at the whole thing, because, as I said, the park is, to a certain extent, a hybrid. And if you look at the stairs, the semicircular stair, the sculptures there, they are of granite. They were supposed to be with the fountain downtown, but that project was abandoned. So he kept those granite sculptures, and he later put them on the circular stairs for the monolith. And this is one of the groups. And I'm showing 4 now, just to give you a vague idea. So this is the small, sort of the innocent children. This is the first one. And here's one of a young, adolescent girl floating in the trees. It can be a symbol of the transition from girl to woman, so the puberty, if you like. And here, at the end, the old woman and the baby. And finally, the skeleton, which is symbolizing death. And then you have come full circle. So it is, you can to a certain extent also say that this is a frieze of life. I'm not saying that he sort of tried to be as good as Edvard Munch when it comes to that, but I mean, they were close acquaintances, they knew about each other. So we can have a wild guess. And I'm just showing you a design of the maze, which is surrounding the monolith. You can actually start, if you like, you can walk on this white granite. You start at the bottom, in the middle of it, when you're there in the park. If you just walk on the white granite, and you end up at the upper end, and you have been walking 3,000 meters. So there is a way in and a way out. And I'm just showing them now 3 examples of the relief. And here's death trying to separate man and woman. And this one is, fairy-like, I would say. But 60 of them a total. And now the last thing I would talk about is the monolith. And I'm showing now as it was when he picked it up. This is about 270,000 tons. It was shipped from the southern part of Norway. It was erected in 1928, the summer of 1929, there were 3 men, 3 stonemasons working on it, from the summer of 1929 until the summer of 1942. So 13 years it took 3 men to carve out this monolith, 17 meters high, 121 people a total, dead and living, children, men, and women, in a very vertical, obviously, shape. And this is a column of Marc Aurèle in Rome, as he has seen. A sketch. And also Hell from 1897. As I said, he was in Paris in 1893. He did visit the studio of Auguste Rodin, but we know that they never met. But he was... we know that he did write, well, he wasn't that impressed by Rodin. That's what he wrote. But I think, in all fairness, we can say that he was very much inspired by him, as many people were. So this Hell is from 1897, and the man in the middle, the upper part of it, sitting with the head in his hands, it's obvious that it's fairly obvious that Gustav Vigeland has seen the gates of hell of Rodin with the thinker. And also, I would like to pay attention to the lower part of this relief, because Vigeland is actually pointing out that the people there, they are sort of squeezed in this horizontal way. And this is what he has been trying to transfer to the monolith. So if you try to imagine tilting this image 90 degrees, you will see a similar shape of what you can see in the monolith. So the same as he was sort of keeping the idea of the fountain all the way, he was keeping the idea of the monolith all the way. So he's keeping a lot of ideas, using and reusing consciously. This is the monolith, the lower part, as that's been carved. And when they were finished, Gustav Vigeland, he decided that there should be some stairs inside of this shed. So there were actually, it was open to the public, so they can go up and down to see the monolith before they tore down the house around Christmas 1944. And this is the top of it. And now, these are just examples of the granites. Here's, I suppose, a mother with 2 children. So it has very much to do with the daily life. It has very much to do with the relationship of man, both on the bridge, on the fountain, and around the monolith. Like here, 3 old women. And this one is possibly most interesting because it shows also the evilness of young persons. These 2 boys bullying an old man. And this man we know who is, I mean, this is possibly the only one we know the name of. He's called Elias. And he was living in Mandal, the birthplace of Gustav Vigeland. And he was mentally retarded. So he was very easy to bully. But Vigeland tried to sort of protect him. So this is an example of showing the evil of people, I would say. And Vigeland also made a very nice bust of Elias, which is on display in the museum. And here we are approaching the final days. This is, as you can see, the fountain beginning to take shape in the park. And you see the outline of the park, you see the main axis, and you see the church in the background, Uranienborg Church. A good story. I'm not saying it's true, but it's a good story, but that someone said that Gustav Vigeland actually asked for that church to be put slightly to the right in order to fit in with the main axis. I don't think it's true, though. No. But it's interesting to see that the fountain was put together in 1944, the summer a year after Gustav Vigeland's death. So what he was very obsessed with, what he started to work with in the late 1890s and early 1900s, he actually never saw in the flesh. And here's the bridge. It's a test of the monolith. And this is also... It's yours? Okay. This is also the park, and it shows the area where the monolith and the fountain was going to be in around 1920. It must have been 1924, 25. Absolutely. So this is the last image that I have. Of this area, the three main things: the bridge, the fountain, and the monolith. And I think that I would say that this is three things: the linearity of the bridge, the circular shape of the monolith. No, sorry, the bridge, the fountain, and the vertical shape of the monolith. It has something to do with the relationship of man, and I think I will conclude with that, and I will leave the floor to you, Louis, and we can sort of sum up together when you are finished. Okay. So thank you very much for the attention. So are you happy?
No, it's okay. Alors, on repasse en français.
Now, back to the French now. For the non-French speakers, think of putting on your headsets after the park's presentation so that you have a more accurate idea of what it's like. I'd like to get back to the title, which is a bit provocative in my presentation, the Gustav Vigeland's populism. And I take the word populist in the way we understand it nowadays in the media language, and we could summarize it as a refusal of any intermediary between elites and the people. And I thought it was interesting to present Vigeland, who's not a politician but a sculptor. And we know that he doesn't have any political claim in his work. But I thought this word could be interesting to mention the Vigeland case from the ethical viewpoint. And I would briefly like to develop 3 points that I find essential. First of all, the relationship between Vigeland and the state, or mostly the city, because it was Oslo, the capital, that that commissioned him with this monumental work. So I'd like to speak about his relationship with the state, the city, and the institutions. And then I'd like to speak about the critics, international critics on the Vigeland Park. And then I'd like to ask the following question: was Vigeland a populist sculptor or even a popular sculptor? So now the first point, Vigeland's life. Let's get back to the background. We are in Norway at the end of the 19th century. It is not an independent country. It is under Swedish rule until 1905. And at the end of the 19th century, there's a parliamentarist movement, mostly a left-wing movement, that claims the national identity by showing geniuses and in theater, it will be Henrik Ibsen, in literature, Knut and Sud, and we could also mention Edvard Munch in painting, and in sculpture, it's Gustav Vigeland who adopts this character of solitaire artist in a romantic way. So yesterday we talked about his youth, which was quite humble. his father was alcoholic and died when Vigeland was 17 years old, so it's a quite tragic life. Then he was self-taught because there wasn't truly a so-called fine arts academy in Oslo until 1909. So Vigeland traveled through Copenhagen and Paris in 1893, then Denmark, and he went to Berlin and met Edvard Munch, and they had some argument due to a woman, and then he went to Florence where he discovered Donatello. So his training is anti-academic somehow because he looked for academic inspirations from Rodin to Donatello in the last decade of the 19th century. So through some affinities that he will find himself, he will build his own personality. And when traveling to Paris in 1893 and then again in 1900 and 1901, I skip some images because they're not all necessary. This is also a relevant moment. In 1897, he receives the mission to restore the sculptures of the Trondheim Cathedral, and even he's asked to create new sculptures by the architect Christie. So when he goes to Paris, he doesn't try to show his work in the different salons like other foreign artists who come to Paris. And I thought it was interesting to mention that, and to mention that difference between Vigeland and institutions. And I will leave aside his training, and I would like to get to the moment where Vigeland kind of goes back to his country, because since 1901 he will not travel too much, or not for a long time. The Abel movement, we've already mentioned it, and in 1902 a commission is created to homage this mathematician. Vigeland takes part in this contest, but doesn't meet the jury's expectation because he's expected to show Abel in his costume in a naturalistic, academic way, and therefore it is a very traditional sculptor, Ingeling, who did win the contest because he met the jury's expectations. But artistically, the symbolist monument of Vigeland is judged as superior to the previous one. So Vigeland, thanks to his contacts, succeeds to convince the jury, and therefore his monument is the one who is eventually erected in the Royal Palace's park. A few years later, 1905, a contest is launched for a monument in homage to Camilla Collett, who is a pioneer feminist in Norway. And he tells the committee this time that he will not take part in the contest, but he says, I have a sketch that is already completed for Camilla Collett, and Camilla Collett is a great Norwegian figure, and Vigeland is interested in the great national figures at the time. So in spite of all, there's a show of the works in the context, but Vigeland wins again with wins again with the monument on the right, but no monument is chosen. And again in 1905, another contest is launched, and his work on Camilla Collett is eventually chosen. And here we see another initiative of the artist that is completed in spite of a strong discussion, a tormentous discussion or stormy discussion in Oslo, and the sculptors started raising against him and demanded a contest for the Oslo, a fountain in Oslo, but this is not a project by the government, but a project by the artist, and that's a whole difference. And I would like to conclude about Vigeland's contacts with his contemporary sculptors, that he's not in the art academy in Oslo when it opens, the Fine Art Academy, is because he doesn't want to be a teacher. Now we see the line, the queue, waiting to visit his workshop, and during the time the Vigeland Park is being implemented, the Norwegian sculpture is busy with recreating the sculptures of the Trondheim Cathedral and the decoration of the City Hall of Oslo that will go for 20 years. We see that these are long-term projects. Of course, in the end, during the Q&A session, we can come back to anything you're interested in. This is in the City Hall of Oslo. It's quite interesting. So we see that Vigeland has a approach on the side of institutions. So his approach could be qualified as an anti-democratic one, and even monarchic, because the sovereign artist shows his work to the audience, to the public, and convinces the public. And in Jan's presentation, we saw how the institutions supported Vigeland also financially, but for a social democratic power in the Oslo city. This quite authoritarian artistic approach actually suited the power perfectly. Now let's come to the critical point. The Vigeland Park, especially this park of sculptures, has no equivalent in Europe. Each tourist that visits Oslo knows it, but the art history in Norway ignores it. Or Vigeland is mentioned as an interesting or bizarre artist, and that, like Jacques Boucheron writes on his study in his study on Brancusi, but that's all. But there is a true difference between the public acceptance of Vigeland and the non-acceptance of scholars. Warhol, who is an art historian, I don't know if he's British anyway, and today he says the park is quite popular, even though intellectuals disdain it because of non-heroic statues, and it's mostly kitsch. And this is what we see that points out in Vigeland's review in reviews on Vigeland. But what shocks is this unique aspect of public commissions, who commission an artist to launch a project. In 1921, Oslo, the city of Oslo, well, it's called differently at the time, but let's simplify it. So the city of Oslo signs a contract with Vigeland, who therefore receives an unlimited financial support to carry out his project, and he can use many stone workers, stone masons. He doesn't carve it himself; he uses masons, and Vigeland accepts to receive to be visited by the public. So he becomes a public man, and that aspect, apart from the style of Vigeland's work and the many naked sculptures, shocked critics internationally. Here's one from 1947. It's in English. I will develop, but don't worry, I'm not going to read everything, and whatever I will read is in French. So the art historian of Czech origin, who was strongly based in Scandinavia, in Great Britain, Joseph Paul Odin says, in his youth, Vigeland was a quite talented artist, but he was ruined later on. his talent was ruined later on. Outside Norway, his symbolist production is quite appreciated. When he was still under Rodin's influence, actually in 1981, there was an exhibit on Vigeland, the only one in France. But the whole later work of Vigeland was less mentioned. It was mentioned, but it wasn't at the heart of the exhibit. So what this critic says is that he's promoted to work on that scale, and also he had it executed. Rodin fought to get his monument Balzac erected, never expected to be as lucky as Vigeland was. Evelyn Watt is a British author, quite conservative. It's a convert Catholic, and he's also shocked by the proliferation of naked sculptures, which to him shows the secularization of Scandinavian society and a kind of death of religion that he fears. He judges the park as a hideous park. He thinks that the monolith is even uglier than Hiroshima's ruins, and this is 1947, so it's quite shocking to write this then. And he thinks that the Scandinavia prefers a bridge than a wall against the east, which means that under the strong public support to Vigeland, this is unacceptable for a liberal. He says he is given what even Michelangelo never got, unlimited support for to carry out his work, to develop his work. And I'm not going to mention all the amounts that were paid for the completion of his park. Well, I summarize now. Evelyn Watt will publish another article on Vigeland where he mentions a monument to humanity, and he doesn't allude whatsoever to what he criticized in Vigeland. Now, Vigeland is a work of art, and Odin even mentions his work as a total work of art. This is not the Wagnerian idea of a total work of art, but this is what is criticized in Vigeland. It is the fact that it is so finished, as if it lacked life. This is opposed to another form of total art, which is uncompletable, unachievable, as Julien mentions it. The gate of hell is work which is characterized by the fact that it is never finished, that it will never be finished, and endlessly unfinished. The gate of hell is not even a work; it's an idea that justifies the coherence in Rodin's work, because his relief has no narrative coherence, consistency, but he's sculpted several groups. But in the Vigeland's case, his work is fully completed. His great work is this park, which is fully completed, and this is why it was criticized. And we're back to the idea that it was such a kitsch work. And another review that I would like to mention is the fact that the park was completed during occupation. And Vigeland was also criticized for receiving soldiers in his workshop in 1941. There were lots of criticisms, especially immediately after the artist's death. Some looked for an expression of friendliness towards the soldiers from Vigeland. So there was no friendliness, and there's no unfriendliness either. But these are criticisms that we find over and over concerning Vigeland's relationships with the German soldiers. And this is a point that I would love to develop, but I think that we're dangerously approaching midday, noon, and Vigeland, but we should not silence it. Vigeland always replied to this, that it wasn't true, but in the monumental official sculpture called Democracy, there is also this type of forms inspired by Art Deco, which are quite finished. And in Vigeland's figures that Jarle showed, there is a sort of tendency to the individuality of figures that may be heroic. When we saw the Running Man, then it's quite true, but some are anti-heroic as well. There's very touching sculptures on elderlies and death, and also views on paternity, as we saw, which are quite tender. And then there's also some humor in some of his work. So I would love to discuss this later on with you. And just in a few words, is Vigeland a populist artist? So I'm going to disappoint you because I leave this in the air. But is he a popular artist? Well, from what we see, if we see the success this park enjoyed, and when we see the films produced by the city of Oslo and pictures of children bathing in the fountain, when we see quite funny pictures, quite nice pictures, this popular sculptor is almost a pop culture sculptor. Some more recent pictures from Instagram, you see, this is quite a popular work of art. Now, did Vigeland want to be popular, Carl? I think you said in some interview that you weren't sure because he didn't like to receive visits, unlike Rodin, who did get a lot of visits. Like, we know that Vigeland didn't go to the opening, wasn't present at the opening of his work. He was quite apart from the world of art. Is it a strategy? Did he want to build a mysterious figure of artist, or is it due to misanthropic nature? We may ask ourselves these questions, and we know that he wasn't interested in any exhibit. Every time he was proposed to exhibit his work, he said this would be absurd, and he mentioned Egyptian artists or Hindu artists. They have the works of Egypt rolled down all the way to Europe so that the rest of the world would know them. This is from an article from the 40s, and we also have an interview of Vigeland by Roger in 1938. She said that Vigeland refused to have any picture taken of his work, and he wasn't interested in advertising his work or himself.
Là, bon, vous avez des citations en norvégien, donc ce sera peut-être difficile.
It is a quotation in Norwegian, so I might find it very difficult to read, but anyway. We could rediscuss even outside this premise. Well, to conclude, I told you he didn't want to exhibit yet. Is it a strategy? Is he maintaining a mystery? Is the work as opaque as the cover around the monolith? Was it something very sincere? We may wonder whether he was not opportunistic, much more than populist, given that he got the support from the public authorities, which compel him in a way. I mean, citizens paying have a right to say this is democracy and the way the money from taxpayers is used. Yet at the same time, he rendered or created or finished his work, and this is what we may think of his style. Something I find rather touching. He's an artist who, until the very last day of his life, wanted to finish his work. And it even went on later after his death. This is the very last sculpture, which was what revealed in, is it 1902? Am I right? 1902, no. I love a lot more to say, modernistic, I don't want to do it here. What is interested him, moderately to mention the public of his time, but that his art would be there for the millenniums to come. Selecting granite was one example, that type of new monument, what he thought would be in the future. Well, that's a pure speculation. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed it, and that has given you food for thought. Thank you very much for your attention.